Order. Before we start, can I say that given it's a hot day, if anybody wants to remove their jackets, please feel free to do so. John Howe to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms Miller. I beg to move that this House has considered the work of the Council of Europe. I am the leader of the delegation, which I declare as an interest, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It pains me actually to start on a slightly sour note. But we are having this debate here in Westminster Hall because successive leaders of the House have said no to us being allowed government time for a debate in the main chamber. Now, given the number of people who have put in for this debate and the many more who have expressed interest in it, I believe that expresses the greatest of interests in this subject, and it is a shame that we will be unable to hear the full richness of contributions from members of the delegation and others due to time constraints. That is no criticism of Westminster Hall as a setting for this debate, Ms Miller, but it is a request to the Minister to provide us with assistance in trying to raise the visibility and importance of the Council of Europe. Most people now understand, or I should say more people now understand, what the Council of Europe is and what it does. As a delegation, we work hard to make our contribution in the plenary sessions of the Parliamentary Assembly, in the committee meetings that take place between the plenary meetings, and more generally. We publish, for example, a summary after each plenary meeting of what we discussed and the character of that meeting. I brief lobby journalists before we go. We issue press releases on key subjects such as the position of Russia or the fate of the British individuals sentenced to death. We have held seminars, well attended, with, for example, Vladimir Kara-Murza, a Russian dissident now in prison, and with Ahmet Yildiz on Turkey. Finally, I raised questions on the subjects of the debate we have had after each meeting. I think this is, in just a moment, I think this has dramatically increased the profile of the Council of Europe amongst parliamentarians and perhaps more generally amongst members of the public. I do, however, appreciate there is still a lot more to do to make sure that people don't confuse us with the EU, an organisation with about half the number of countries as us. I give way.
I'm very, very grateful. Would you agree with me that given the Council of Europe represents 47 countries and its mission is to empower and promote our fundamental values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law, that at the time we've seen Vladimir Putin breach all those values in his invasion, that we see these values breached in China and elsewhere, this place should give much more paramount importance to those fundamental values and the Council of Europe and these such debates.
Well, the Council of Europe is not responsible for China. It is responsible for what happens in Europe, and it's the three pillars of it, of human rights, the rule of law and democracy, are crucial to its future, and that is what we need to hold countries to. Now, the reason for saying what I was saying before the intervention is that the role of the Council of Europe has never been more important. For me, one of the proudest moments was when we expelled Russia from membership of the Council. And I'm told that I was the first politician to ask for this to happen in a letter that I sent to the Secretary-General asking for their expulsion. I was also pleased to see the support from the delegation of this action. Thank heavens, too, that the COVID crisis has diminished substantially. The sort of diplomacy required simply cannot be carried out by Zoom or remotely. It is great to be back in person for our effectiveness. And I'm pleased that newer members of the delegation can now see that what I said all along about it being clearer what the Council stood for was best achieved through their personal attendance was absolutely true. I'm sure that other members will want to comment on Russia in further considerations. Of course.
Thank you, Dame Maria. And I'm very proud to be part of the UK delegation to the Council of Europe and to sit in committees and give speeches to raise important topical issues such as the war in Ukraine. And can I thank the member for Henley for recently arranging for us to meet with the Ukrainian delegation in Strasbourg to demonstrate the UK's support. So does my honourable friend agree with me how essential it is that the UK continues to work in the Council of Europe It is a vital part of our global Britain agenda, and we must continue to lead on important international matters.
I completely agree with that intervention. I will come on to say something about that at the end of my speech, but I do think that that is a crucial point of what we are about. The Russian expulsion has, however, left the Council with a deficit, which this time we are keen to see professionally filled. And I appreciate the need for reform of the Council, and we look forward to participating in that reform. It is frankly bizarre that meetings have taken place at a ministerial level in which there has been little contact with the delegation, which has tremendous experience of the Council and the work that it does. But I am grateful that the UK government has agreed to provide an additional £2.8 million this year to help the Council out of the hole left by the expulsion of Russia. That gives us an opportunity to take advantage of the current situation to push the UK position forward in the full knowledge that we are participating fully in the future of the Council. It is important to understand how the Council works. It works on the basis of putting forward conventions, international treaties for countries to agree. These set standards across the wider Europe in key areas. And let me give one example of this, and which goes a long way to answering the question, what does the Council do for us? And that is the Istanbul Convention. The government has set the 31st of July as the date by which it expects to ratify the Istanbul Convention on combating violence against women and girls and domestic violence. Many of us regard the Istanbul Convention as a flagship convention of the Council of Europe and as the gold standard for the protection of women and girls in Europe. And, Madam Chairman, you and I have spoken at a debate that I organised in the COVID period on this subject. The government signed the convention in 2012 and has been working since that date to strengthen UK laws to better protect women and girls. We do like to change the law in this country first before we finally ratify a treaty. The necessary command paper was laid in both houses on the 17th of May, and I hope that there will be no objections within the following 21 sitting days and that the Convention will be ratified. There are two reservations within the Convention which the UK is allowed to make. The first concerns crimes in UK law which are not crimes in other territories, and the second relates to migrant victims. Our members are free to ask ministers questions about these caveats. But this illustrates only too well how the Council works. A treaty, non-compulsory to sign, where the arguments for or against are set out and fully debated, and where the successful signing of the treaty involves us as members of the delegation in pursuing the diplomacy involved through, for example, Westminster Hall debates, by encouraging meetings between ministers and the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and by our membership of parliamentary networks such as Women Free from Violence. The Council is also active in the field of human rights. Never has there been a greater need to be on top of this issue internationally. I've already held a debate in the main chamber on the future of the court because it does need reform. There is too much influence of NGOs. Some of the judges could be more suitably qualified. It is not just Russia's judges which were sent back for examination. The same has also happened with Iceland. But one of the biggest tests for the court is occurring in Turkey, where the Committee of Ministers, the second chamber of the Council, has begun infringement proceedings against Turkey. The key question here is, are we to allow Turkey to infringe the court, or are we to take action? And what should that action consist of? Does it mean the expulsion of Turkey from the Council, or are there other routes to follow, since we cannot do nothing? As one of the rapporteurs for the Council on Turkey, let me explain the situation in relation to Osman Kavala. Kavala is a leading businessman and campaigner who has been sentenced to aggravated life imprisonment after a period of pre-trial detention. The Turkish authorities argue that the original court case has been complied with in relation to the European Court of Human Rights, in that Kavala was released to be rearrested the following day. The court argues that its judgment applies to the whole of the evidence base for all charges brought against Kavala, which is lacking in any evidence. And that is the source of the current impasse with the Turkish government. Now, I know that Turkey faces many attempts at terrorism. I have great sympathy for them in this. But the question has to be asked as to the extent that these anti-terrorism laws are too restrictive and contravene human rights. There are other examples, of course, besides the Kavala case. What this illustrates is the important work that the Council does in monitoring countries to ensure that they are complying with the three pillars of the Council: human rights, the rule of law and democracy. This and election monitoring are important functions. While I can see there is room for doing joint monitoring exercises with the Committee of Ministers, this is an important element of what the Council does, and I would not like to see it given away to other organisations and the Council not have a role in this. Of course, there is plenty of opportunity for the Council to work with other organisations, such as the OSCE. I have already had discussions with the head of the UK Delegation to the OSCE, and we are looking at ways of working together more closely. But it would be wrong to see the OSCE in having more experience of election monitoring or in monitoring more generally. A key question remains, though: what role for the Council of Europe in the future? I welcome the UK government's support for Kosovo joining the Council, a role we as a delegation too support. There have already started many discussions about this in which we can, should and do participate. The recent Turin ministerial meeting is one such example, and I'm grateful for the attendance of the Foreign Secretary at that meeting. Another is the debate which took place in Dublin at the Standing Committee on the future discussions that will take place. Personally, I think there is so much more that the Council can do in the area of the rule of law and in promoting democracy across the wider Europe. In both these areas, there are in many countries gaps and knowledge, a knowledge that is needed to help them get the right answer. And we stand ready to work in promoting this area. And it is one where we would, as a delegation, value the chance to have more extensive discussions with the Foreign Office and indeed with other ministers. We do have the experience of pulling programmes in this area together. And let me conclude by saying that in putting down written questions after each... I'm sorry, of course I'll give way.
Thank you for giving way. Would he agree with me that one of the problems about the Council of Europe is that its work, importance and role is simply not fully understood, even by members of this House, never mind the general public? And I know he's worked very hard on this. We do need to have a much more active public relations initiative explaining what the value of the Council of Europe is, what its powers are, and what changes it can and does bring about amongst member states.
I agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman fully on that, and I try my hardest as a leader of this delegation to push that. But I do think it is absolutely essential that we get across what the Council is really about and how it can help, and what role it now plays in, I have to use the expression, in a post-Brexit Britain. It plays a vital role in ensuring that we have good relations with parliamentarians in other parts of Europe. Now, let me conclude by saying that in putting down written questions after each debate at the Council of Europe, this also brings home to all of us just how wide the debates are and how they do affect policy across government. Those debates which relate to the Foreign Office number about 30%. The rest cover a range of ministries from DWP to culture. And I ask the questions that I put to them to show the range of debates that we conduct, partly to make sure that there is a written answer on record for the issues which have been discussed, and so that we understand what government is doing. This is welcome, at least by us. But there is an issue on which we would welcome the Minister's help, and that is in making sure the government's position can be put across when rapporteurs visit the country on behalf of the Council and need to see a government minister. I know this is a pain, but without this, the result does not look good and can leave us in an embarrassing position. I'm extremely grateful, not just for the work of all the delegation. We try to operate on a genuinely cross-party basis wherever possible, and I think the number of people who have turned up for this debate illustrates that. We also have an utterly brilliant secretariat led by Nick Wright, to whom we would all like to pay our thanks. And finally, I would, on behalf of all of us, like to pay thanks. Sorry? Don't forget your thanks. I will come to other people in just a minute. And finally, I would like, on behalf of us all, to pay thanks to 3 people in Strasbourg. First, Alan Mitchell, the chairman of the Committee on the Prevention of Torture. Second, our judge at the court, Tim Ike, who we are grateful to for getting to know us and sharing with us his expertise and experience. And thirdly, our permanent representative, Sandy Moss, whose assistance and cooperation with this delegation is second to none and has been particularly helpful. The Council of Europe is crucially important for our relationship with the wider Europe, particularly after Brexit. It sets a method of cooperation that I feel can alienate no one. It is a major part in our international diplomacy, and the departure of Russia offers us an opportunity to make real change. And I look forward to what the Minister has to say.
The question is that this House has considered the work of the Council of Europe, and before I call the first speaker, can I suggest an informal time limit of 4 minutes, and that wind-ups will start at 10:28. Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Maria. Let me congratulate the Honourable Member for Henley in obtaining this debate today, and the very consensual tone that is not only established today, but that she tries to create for the UK's Parliamentary Delegation at that, in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I welcome that. But of course, there are issues that will divide some of us, and we cannot shy away from those because they're important. But let me say, first of all, if anybody taking a long-term perspective of the development of the European family of nations would see how dramatically the Council of Europe has played a role in enhancing the values of democracy and the rule of law. If you look at those countries which left both fascist background, Spain, Portugal in the past, not a long time ago now for many, but more recently, that when the Warsaw Pact broke up, the change in many of those nations has been dramatic. And perhaps the failure of Russia to be brought into that family is regrettable, but must be measured against the success in so many other countries. But that said, the expulsion of Russia was necessary because Russia was such a flagrant offender against the basic values of the Council of Europe. And we do have a problem in knowing how we deal with those who are not prepared to accept the rules and the regime that the Council performs. And obviously the case of Osman Kavala is central to that, because how we deal with Turkey, how we deal with an offender, a persistent offender, against the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights is central to what the Council of Europe is all about. But in the few moments that I have to make my remarks, I think I would want to make these points. There are many aspects of the Council of Europe that are tremendously important. The role of the Venice Commission in providing a legal framework in which nations can seek advice about their own rule of law. The role of Greco, the anti-corruption body, is tremendously important. We know corruption in many countries is not simply a major issue. I was in Bosnia last week, and nobody visiting Bosnia would be amazed to know that corruption is probably one of the central issues that affects that country and the way young people in Bosnia view that country. So having a role in fighting corruption matters enormously. The Commission on the Prevention of Torture is fundamental. The capacity to have challenge inspections here, as well as in those that we feel are going to be offenders, matters enormously, because we're all bound by the same rule of law. But that's why, Dame Maria, I just want to touch for a few moments on the court, because this morning, of course, it's controversial here in the United Kingdom. But I would say to members on all sides of this House that we cannot say to others, please abide by the rule of law and listen to the institutions to which we are subject, unless we're prepared to make that same judgment ourselves. And that really does matter, because it's fundamental to how we as a nation behave. And it's fundamental in our capacity to say to other nations, these are the values that this country of ours wants to uphold. We were fundamental in establishing the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's important we do recognise that. Now, actually, the Rwanda judgment, as I understand it, is an interim judgment. It simply says that there needs to be delay before removal takes place, and I welcome that, because I think it's an outrageous policy that has been brought forward. But that isn't the point. The point still is this: do we respect the Convention or not? And I think the answer really for it, of course we will.
I'm interested in the Honourable Gentleman's remarks on the court, and he makes a good point about needing to obey the rules. Will he also accept that there are occasions when sometimes, and the proposer of this debate referred to the fact that the court does need reform, sometimes strays into areas that perhaps it should not? For example, the question of whether prisoners should have a vote or not. Fundamentally, there are many who think that is actually a political question that admits of two answers. Does he agree that perhaps the court does need some reform?
Well, I think the court needs reform. I'll certainly concede that, because one thing that is the most outrageous thing about the court, frankly, is that the length of time for people to obtain justice is unacceptably long, and we do have to look at what that means. I'm not sure I agree with the honourable member on the particular example, because there've got to be mixed feelings about in many countries, prisoners do vote. I've gone into prisons on the election monitoring organisations to watch that process taking place. Not such a preposterous view. If that is something that is arguable, we have to look, yes, at the Council of Ministers looking at the Convention and whether that needs amendment, not about the role of the court. The court's role is to implement the Convention as is. And now it's the politicians who created the Convention. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, Dame Maria, I've exceeded my time, I'm afraid, and forgive me. But I would simply finish my remarks by saying this, that we cannot have half a Council of Europe. If we believe in the role of the European Convention, if we believe in the institutions, then let's assent to even when it pains us a little, because it pains other people an awful lot more, and it's in our interest.
Sir Edward Lee.
The Council of Europe was founded in 1949 by the Treaty of London, and it was founded really to combat fascism and Nazism and communism. And it played an extraordinarily positive role in doing precisely that. Perhaps its greatest hours of glory were during the breakup of the Soviet Union and the welcoming of new democratic states in Eastern Europe. Whilst the EU was centralising, the Council of Europe is welcoming, with 46 member states. It has real power, for instance, on the Convention of Human Rights, and on that subject, a few words in a moment. Perhaps, as my honourable friend has said, we now in the Council of Europe have a new and very important role, given the appalling behaviour of the Russian Federation. I personally feel betrayed by what Russia has done as a Member of Parliament, former chairman of the All-Party Russia Group, who has sought to understand but not condone Russian politics. I think there is absolutely no excuse for what Russia has done in invading Ukraine. Ukrainians have a right to self-determination. I don't believe for a moment that Mr. Putin believes that there is any threat to Russia by NATO. I think he is trying to establish the Russian Empire. No doubt it's very sad for some Russians that the Russian Empire is over, but it was presumably sad for some Turks when the Turkish Empire was over, or the British Empire, or the French Empire, or any other empire. We all have a right to self-determination. The Council of Europe, under the guidance of people like my honourable friend, has acted with great vigour in this latest crisis. But that was not the case last time. They were expelled for a time from the Parliamentary Assembly after they took over Crimea, and then because people in the Council of Europe needed the money, they were allowed to dribble back in. And that must never happen again. We must state and proclaim what is right and not be deterred by doing what is right because we need their money. And I'm very grateful for the Minister in ensuring with other Western powers that we are filling in the financial gap made by the Russian expulsion. So my point that I want to make is the Council of Europe has to concentrate on its core role, which is dealing with egregious human rights abuses in places like Russia, and there are other countries where there are some difficulties. I'm thinking of countries like Azerbaijan and Turkey. What they don't want to do is start nitpicking in demonstrably democratic Western powers, and we saw that with the row over the voting rights of prisoners. And we are seeing it, and this is really a hot topic, we are seeing it even today with the very late intervention of the European Court of Human Rights, and that has resulted in the flight to Rwanda not being able to take off with any people. And they said, the European Court of Human Rights said that one Iraqi man faced a real risk of irreversible harm. Now, what is the real risk of irreversible harm? The real risk of irreversible harm, the really immoral thing, is allow people to go on crossing the channel and potentially drowning. And what the European Court of Human Rights and the Church of England and all the critics of the government policy on Rwanda have to ask themselves is, what is their solution? Now, this may be a temporary intervention by the European Court of Human Rights. I hope it is a temporary intervention, but it rather makes the point that the Council of Europe has a core role in dealing with egregious human rights abuses and putting somebody on a safe flight, going to a safe hotel in a safe place, is not an egregious abuse of human rights. Thank you.
I'm very pleased we're having this debate today, and very pleased that, to be a member of an alternate member of the Council of Europe. And I must say I found the experience very interesting. I'm, as I said to the leader of the UK delegation in an intervention, I think that the lack of information and understanding of publicity of what the Council of Europe does is something that has to be addressed. It is a very big body. It spends a great deal of money on staff and resources and all that, and I'm not complaining about that, but I do think there has to be a much better understanding of what it does. The foundation in 1949 was historic and dramatic because it gave a European focus on human rights. It supported the principle of the European Convention of Human Rights and the European Court of Human Rights. And whilst there are no doubt people who are not very pleased with the decision made last night, personally I think it's absolutely the right decision to make, because if any member state, including this one, goes outside of the European Convention of Human Rights and behaves in the way that the British government wanted to do, then there are consequences that follow, and the court has intervened to bring that about. We might not, I personally support the decision, others may not, but we cannot complain about other countries not complying, such as Turkey or in the past Russia, if we don't stand up for exactly the same principle ourselves, that the European Court of Human Rights is something that the whole of Europe apparently subscribes to and ought to continue to subscribe to. And I find the discussions within the Council of Europe on human rights issues very important, but more importantly in some ways is the engagement and delegations that take place to different member states in order to try to improve their human rights records, improve their prison conditions, and improve their prisoner rehabilitation regimes. Those things are very, very important as well. Now, Russia was expelled from the Council of Europe, and that has now happened. It is a huge step to expel a member state. And whilst I obviously, like everyone in this chamber today, totally condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war that's going on there, I think we have to ask ourselves a question that what message is that to human rights campaigners and victims of human rights abuse in Russia or in different parts of Russia if they no longer have access to the European Court of Human Rights? And I know the issue of Turkey is writ large. Turkey is an abuser of human rights, its prison conditions, its treatment of Kurdish and Armenian minorities, and a number of others. I'm personally not in favour of the expulsion of Turkey from the Council of Europe. I want to see an engagement and work with and support those very many brave journalists and human rights campaigners in Turkey in trying to bring about improvements in their society and their country. The role of election observation is a very important one. I was recently an election observer, not on behalf of the Council of Europe, but on behalf of a different body, to the elections in Colombia. And having observed other elections in other places, I see the great importance, not necessarily of finding all the faults, but simply being a presence at the polling stations, unexpected, with the right of investigation and inspection of what is going on. And so to me, the Council of Europe is a very, very important body. And I conclude with this, Madam Chair, that I think we have to ensure there is a serious information campaign going out about the role of the Council of Europe, all of its policy areas, environment, human rights, and many other social policy areas, so that people understand what it does. Obviously, there was a funding issue with Russia's removal, but that ought to be a spur to us to have a much better information campaign and much better reporting back. And the least we could expect is to have a debate in the main chamber in our Parliament rather than being here in Westminster Hall. No criticism of Westminster Hall, but this ought to be a main chamber debate.
Or friend the member for Henley in securing this debate, and indeed upon his leadership of the UK delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly. And following on directly from the Right Honourable Member for Islington, who asked the question in an intervention and has reiterated the point that people in this building don't understand the Council of Europe. And he's absolutely right to say that. I was in the tea room some months ago explaining to colleagues that the Council of Europe covers land stretching from Azerbaijan to the Atlantic and from the Mediterranean to the Arctic Circle. And even then, some people couldn't grasp the fact that this was not the European Union, but something much bigger, and indeed, I would argue, much more important. And one of my colleagues present at that occasion, and I won't name her because I hate to embarrass the Home Secretary, said, well, why do we pay so little attention? And I looked her straight in the eyes and said, because it's got the word Europe in it. And I'm afraid that's the sad fact of life. The Council of Europe does an enormous amount of work, has done, particularly over the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Following the Russian invasion of Crimea in 2014, we suspended the voting rights from the Russian delegation. They then walked out. And it was the British delegation that punches far and away above its weight in the Parliamentary Assembly that took the stand and resisted their readmission. With one dishonourable exception, I'm ashamed to say was a member on these benches. Every member of Parliament from every political party voted against readmission in support of our colleagues in the Baltic states, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. But others thought they knew better and let the Russians back in. So here we are, a couple of years later, with the Russians having taken the wrong signal, believing that Europe would do nothing about Ukraine. And it took the robust attack from my right honourable friend, my honourable friend, the member, he ought to be right honourable, my honourable friend, the member for Henley, to seek to undo the damage and make sure that Russia was properly and again suspended. Those are the powers that this delegation to the Council of Europe can have and exercise. There's some unfinished business. We talk a lot about the Donbass, rightly, at the moment. We talk quite a lot about Crimea. We've forgotten Cyprus. There is a member state of the Council of Europe, Turkey, that in 1974 invaded and occupied part of the territory of another member state, Cyprus. It's nearly 50 years since that happened, and this matter still remains unresolved. And there are still Turkish troops of occupation on soil of another sovereign state of the Council of Europe. And that, in its own way, is just as wrong as what is happening in Ukraine today. In passing, I'd like to mention two other things. First of all, I would like to thank personally Christopher Yvonne, who was the permanent representative during my time as leader of the delegation, who provided massive support during our discussions about the Russian Federation and contributed in, I believe, an exemplary way to the work between an ambassador and members of Parliament in advising us, supporting us, and making sure that we had the information that we needed to do the job. And I hope that the Foreign Office will recognise that. And finally, Dame Maria, I'd also like to put on record my appreciation of the work done by the Secretariat, who are superb.
Yeah. Many years with a brief interlude. And the bottom line is that the Council of Europe stands up for our fundamental values, for democracy, human rights and the rule of law. And around the world, beyond the sphere of the Council of Europe, we see them under attack. And obviously, we see them under attack in Ukraine. I'm proud to be the rapporteur for the Council of Europe in respect for trade in terms of instilling those values, democracy, human rights and the rule of law, plus sustainable development and compliance with the Paris Agreement and subsequent COP agreements in trade agreements. And I think it's important that we as Britain actually shine a light at this light of our values around the Council of Europe and beyond that perimeter. But I think we also need to look at ourselves, because when we look at those values and see in terms of the rule of law what we're doing here at the moment, we need to ask questions about ourselves. And the obvious examples are the breach of the Northern Ireland Protocol, where that's a breach of international law that will undermine the Good Friday Agreement and indeed the Northern Ireland economy itself. We need to think about the rights to peaceful protest that we've seen in the police crime and courts bill, whether that's compliant with the conventions, because quite frankly the idea that the prospect of some annoyance and disturbance or discontinuity of businesses by the judgment of police officers should be sufficient to stop a peaceful process in a democratic country is abhorrent to me, and certainly is the sort of thing that would play into the hands of Vladimir Putin. We do need to think about the issues around Rwanda. I mean, clearly we've had examples where Israel refused now to send their refugees to Rwanda because they might face torture, death or rape, etc. And we need to think about evidence and not think, oh no, it's a court, as has been suggested, interfering. And on that point, we need to think about our own independence of our own judiciary and how that should stand strong and not be attacked by the government. Because in recent years, we have seen our courts and the Supreme Court attacked by ministers and amplified in the press on key Supreme Court decisions, in particular giving, of course, the right to Parliament to vote on the EU deal, and secondly, bringing democracy back after the prolonged prorogation of Parliament. So there is a report by the All-Party Group on Democracy and Constitution that, in fact, I chair, that has come out quite recently flagging this up, and indeed the fact that the Supreme Court has now reversed 7 of its decisions in the last 2 years. So where we criticise the intimidation and chilling of an independent court, we should look also towards ourselves whether we are satisfying those fundamental values. So in conclusion, I'm very much a supporter of those fundamental values. I rejoice in the fact, of course, that we were founding members, that Winston Churchill, after the war, as has been pointed out, was instrumental in bringing about this bastion of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. And we now see around the world, whether it's China, I appreciate that's not in the Council of Europe, or elsewhere, the breakdown of these values and the championing an alternative totalitarian or authoritarian systems. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to fight the fight, to be a bastion for those values and not to let them undermine at home. So I very much welcome this debate from the member for Henley, and we need to stand firm together for our fundamental values.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Dame Maria, and a huge thank you also to our wonderful representative, who's been a real champion for us newbies in the 2019 intake who have been lucky enough to serve on the Council of Europe. The Honourable Member for Henley has been a great help to myself and everybody else who's here speaking this morning. The Council of Europe, of which I'm honoured to be a member, has greatly contributed to the stability and the progress of our continent for decades. And I credit its longevity to its founding ideals, those of which we've heard this morning, and those who have come since, determined to build upon them and keep them alive. All member states stand together under a common banner to protect democracy, human rights and the rule of law. And that is something that we should absolutely be proud of. It was Winston Churchill who in the 1940s was one of the main protagonists in a new regional organisation which became the Council of Europe. And he recognised back then the cooperation and the need in Europe and understood well known then that mankind's proclivity for violence and discrimination. It has to be said that an institution is the lengthening shadow of a man or a woman. And Churchill understood this and rightly recognised them as the hallmarks of democracy. He knew that if we were to learn from and avoid repeating some of the mistakes and the conflicts of the 20th century, how apt that is today, that institutions such as the Council of Europe would be and continue to be absolutely essential. And I'm sure that I speak for all members of the House when I say how proud I am that this country has been there right from the very beginning. As one of the founding signatories of the Council of Europe Statute in 1949, I sincerely hope that our commitment to this world-leading human rights organisation will be as strong as it was over 70 years ago and will continue to be just that. Now, I have been particularly proud because on Monday next week, I will have my first ever meeting in the beautiful city of Strasbourg. And although my French is rather appalling, I will actually be the first rapporteur from the 2019 intake and have been working on the ethical, cultural and educational challenges of track and trace applications and technologies. And I'm very proud to have had that position. I haven't been coerced into it at all, but I've taken it on board and very much enjoyed it. And what I would like to say is that actually, if there was ever a time to look at the challenges that this particular rapporteurship has given us, then certainly the commitment and the dedication that I've personally seen from the Council's founding ideals and the principles of all those who have helped me has been nothing but inspiring. And I really do say that. The people who have helped me from the Council of Europe have been absolutely wonderful. Whilst my own work will pale into insignificance in comparison to the immense achievements of many people over the Council, and certainly some within the room today, it has been a genuine pleasure to get to know those people on the Council of Europe who are fantastic people. Before I close, it's worth saying that in its lifetime, the Council has had some quite outstanding achievements that we ought to recognise here this morning. It abolished the death penalty in all of its member countries. Not a single execution has taken place in any member states since 1997. But moreover, it put forward the first instrument criminalising the sexual abuse of children. It strengthened the prevention of torture and to this day regularly makes unannounced visits to places of detention in member states to evaluate the treatment of detainees. The list goes on and on. And as I'm running out of time, I shall sum up and just say it has been a constant in our nation's character for all of my lifetime, and I sincerely hope that it continues to be. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
For allowing me to participate in this debate. And can I thank the Honourable Member for Henley, who's also a very good and dear friend, and it's a real pleasure to be here to support him and to thank him for his role with dedication and enthusiasm as a leader of the UK delegation to the Council of Europe. I think this House should be grateful and thankful to the Honourable Member for his clear commitment, which we all appreciate. I'm certainly pleased to be here to discuss how we can work together for the betterment of the UK, but also how the Council of Europe can benefit the likes of Northern Ireland. And I know the Honourable Member has tried to do that. We should be representing the smaller states within the Council of Europe as well. Madam Chair, there is no doubt that there is some sort of fragility after Brexit in relation to the UK. The core responsibility of the Council of Europe is to promote democracy and human rights. And I'm a great believer in human rights and speak on that issue in this House on many occasions. And the rule of law within the continent of Europe. We've seen this all too recently with the immediate expulsion of the Russian Federation and the suspension of relations with Belarus. The right decisions. The Honourable Gentleman led that, and we thank him for it. Ministers took the hard decision to expedite matters for the sake of protection, and there's no doubt that this has paid off in terms of unity. I'm also a great believer in teamwork, Madam Chair, and there's no I in team, so it's how we all do this together, and I think the Minister espouses that in abundance. There are many benefits the UK are rewarded with by being a part of the Council of Europe. For example, we're able to push through world-class policy and legislation. Again, an example, the Council of Europe have been instrumental in preventing and combating domestic violence and violence against women. Great supporter of that legislation, of that change of attitude and law. These standards have been seen as groundbreaking. That's not my word, that's the words of others who have witnessed it. Domestic violence has impacted globally. We must be proud of this, but still do more to widen goals and aspirations. And very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, in relation to Northern Ireland, I understand that the Council of Europe have their questions about the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill. I know that's not what this debate's about, but just to give an example. But I must admit that I do too. That's a debate for another day, but it's great to see an interest in Northern Ireland affairs in the Council of Europe. But I do hope that all of the views are taken into account and not simply one side. And again, I know that the Honourable Gentleman, who is an Honourable Member, an Honourable Man, will take in part in those views as well. Portugal have made fantastic contributions in relation to traffic victims among refugees. These are real issues faced by most governments. We have the platform to deal with and prevent these issues together. And I do not see why the impacts of Brexit should be detrimental in any way to global prosperity. The UK played an instrumental part in establishing the Council in Europe in 1949, and the UK's influence within it makes the Council of Europe, I believe, better able to protect the UK's goals in Europe. And I think the Honourable Member for Henley has done that admirably. Despite global tensions, this should be seen as an inclusive process for states to share and work towards potential goals. We have the capacity to hold those to account when deemed necessary, as seen in recent events, but also support other member states indeed as well. Fundamental values of the Council are often forgotten, and it's imperative we have a platform to work together. Can I make a plea for the rights and democracy for young people? Over 5,000 youth leaders are trained each year in the youth centres in Budapest and Strasbourg. I encourage government and can I make a plea for the Minister to consider something similar for the United Kingdom? As I previously stated, we were a crucial part of the EOC process, and we should be encouraging our young people to want to learn about democracy and human rights. More importantly, this should be facilitated for them. I commend the Honourable Gentleman for his work in Turkey, guilty of some of the worst human rights and persecution of religious groups across the world. I conclude, Madam Chair, with this comment. We have the real potential to deliver goals and aspirations if we're willing to work together and do what's right. That teamwork I mentioned earlier on, very important. There are so many issues going on across the globe, and we are stronger tackling them together. I praise all the work done thus far, and again thank the member for Henley for ensuring the strength and unity of the UK, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland placed within the Council of Europe. Thank you.
Paul Howell.
Of course, by congratulating the member for Henley for securing the debate and commend him for his dedicated efforts in supporting the UK team. I think it's important to outline what the Council of Europe is before discussing its work. As many members have said already, I don't think it's particularly obvious to the broader public. It's quite often, understandably, confused with the European Council. So I'll give you my opinion as a new member as to where it is. And this was founded in the aftermath of World War II. The Council of Europe is first and foremost a human rights organisation. The UK has been a member since its inception, and we played an essential role in drafting its best-known document, the European Convention on Human Rights. Since 1949, it's expanded from 10 to 46 members and now stretches from Iceland to Turkey, taking in states of all sizes. Its purpose is to promote and maintain what one could call liberal democratic values in member states. Human rights, democracy and the rule of law are the priorities of the Council of Europe, which is why it seeks to hold members to account on these issues. Some of its recent reports have focused on human trafficking in Norway, corruption in Malta and prison overcrowding in Switzerland. Among its achievements is the abolition of the death penalty in member states, as has already been stated, with the last execution having taken place over 25 years ago. And that supports why the UK delegation has strongly denounced the recent death sentence handed down to Aidan Aslin, Sean Pinner and Soudan Brown by Russian forces in Ukraine. What I most admire about PACE, and indeed the Council of Europe as a whole, is that it provides a forum for European countries to work together to uphold our shared values while respecting the sovereignty of member states. Our membership of it is one of the best examples of us leaving the EU, but not Europe. Although I've only been to one PACE session so far, it was one of the most consequential meetings, as it was when Russia was excluded from the Council of Europe. In consultation with PACE, the Council of Europe's committee ministers suspended Russia the day after the invasion began. At the extraordinary session I attended on the 15th of March, PACE voted in favour of expelling Russia, which the Council of Ministers did the following day. In this session, I was privileged to hear in person from the female delegates of Ukraine and virtually from their male colleagues who remained behind to fight the Russian invasion. To meet delegates who had brought their children from a war zone to the chamber and the following day were going to return was a strange and powerful experience. But it was undoubtedly the right action to take, as there is no aspect of the Russian government's actions in Ukraine that support the principles of human rights, democracy or rule of law. At the same time, it's worth noting that the expulsion means Russian citizens can no longer take their government to the European Court of Human Rights, a means previously used by dissidents such as Alexei Navalny to raise the profile of cases that would not be heard fairly in their domestic courts. It also allows Russia to restore the death penalty, theoretically. So this decision does potentially have grave consequences for Russian citizens and those living in areas under Russian control. But given Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, it seems highly unlikely that this change would in reality make any difference to the actions of the Russian government, as they appear to demonstrate contempt for other laws. Since expelling Russia, PACE members have unanimously supported a resolution calling for an ad hoc international criminal tribunal to investigate and prosecute suspected Russian war crimes in the Ukraine, and I expect the Council of Europe will continue to call attention to the human rights violations that are occurring in Ukraine, and in that respect, its work is more important than ever. To conclude, the opportunity to be in a forum that is both cross-party and cross-Europe creates a powerful understanding of views, not least in the many side discussions that take place outside the main chamber. The value of the Council is in that very opportunity itself. And I would also commend all of the UK support team for their help in facilitating this effort. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mohindra, and just a reminder, we move to wind-ups at 10:28, please.
Thank you very much, Dame Maria. It's a real pleasure to be called in this debate under your chairship. Can I first start by thanking my friend, the Honourable Member for Henley, for being able to call this really important debate. I think it's a reflection on the importance of this debate, where we look around and it's cross-party and actually covers both houses, with law folks in attendance keeping an eye on proceedings here. As a new member of the delegation, similarly to my honourable member from Setchfield and North Norfolk, it's been a real eye-opener being part of the UK delegation and physically visiting Strasbourg. And it's a real, I think, crowning glory for us as a UK and global Britain, where the importance of our voice in that arena is so well regarded. I think part of today needs to be the education of colleagues that aren't cited on the excellent work done in Strasbourg and in Paris and virtually. And I know reference has been made to various members of this delegation being rapporteurs, and I know the importance that those particular countries and topics are covered. We've already spoken about Russia being expelled from the Council of Europe, and I think it was the right and proper decision to be made. But I wanted to focus on the money side of things, as a Conservative, low-tax Conservative at that. I had the opportunity to pose a question on behalf of my particular group to the Secretary-General of the Council of Europe. The Russian delegation contributed about €33 million per year, so it's a big shortfall. Can I take this opportunity to thank the Minister and our government for contributing to that shortfall? And it's right that we do our bit where appropriate, but it does need to be amongst all partners. The value of the Council of Europe remains really important, as shown by Kosovo potentially joining. It's one of the few international forums where people can have those quiet conversations by the water cooler to talk about really important issues. It's one of the things that I think the value of physical meetings really reflected. As someone that tried to do the virtual meetings initially, and the difficulty that entailed as a new delegate, I think the physical side is really, really important. I'm not going to speak about the ECHR, especially as I'm a PPS in the Home Office, but we will, I'm sure, look at that in due course as we propose in the Queen's speech with our own Human Rights Act. Now, I think it's fair to say that other members in this debate have spoken about a lot of the positives, but also some of the necessary difficulties of the Council of Europe. And it does need to be an evolution. And I think part of the process of today will be talking about actually what are the good things, but how do we hope to see it change in the future. I will keep it brief, Madam Chairman, because I know that we've got wind-ups due, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. It's a pleasure to wind up for the SNP in this debate, and it's been interesting to hear the various worldviews expressed across the Chamber today, but I'm very glad from the SNP's perspective to hear the support for the Council of Europe from across the Chamber, and I very much associate myself with that. As a member of the European Parliament, as I was for 16 years, I spent 192 weeks in Strasbourg over the years, so the Council of Europe is close to my heart. It was a terrible thing I had to suffer with such a wonderful environment and great colleagues from the Council of Europe. And I was always struck by the genius of the twin-track mechanism that we have, with the Council of Europe focusing upon the citizens and empowering the legal rights of the citizens against their own governments and states, and the EU, which is a more political trade union overtly. Now, it grieves me deeply, and that will surprise nobody, it grieves me deeply that the UK has left and withdrawn from that cooperation in the European Union. Now, I'm not in the business of fighting old battles, but Scotland wants to be back in that cooperation. We are an internationalist party. We want to see cooperation and multilateralism in all its forms, in all its forums. And Scotland's best future is, to my party's perspective, an independent state within the European Union. We'll come back to that. But it's precisely that withdrawal from the EU, that retreat from that international multilateral cooperation, which the UK has taken Scotland out of, that makes the cooperation within the Council of Europe framework all the more important, all the more vital. And I do applaud the work of the delegation at this point. It's had enthusiastic SNP support, and Tommy Shepherd and Hannah Burdell are enthusiastic members of the delegation, and so long as the SNP is part of this House, that cooperation will continue. It suits our worldview to cooperate internationally. It suits our worldview to be part of a multilateral enforcement of decency and human rights, so that, of course, will continue going forward. So we've been glad to hear support across the House for the work of the Council. We do need to bear in mind that that needs to be intellectually consistent. And work and support with the Council means that we do it when it's difficult as well as when it suits us. So I have to say I've been uneasy at some of the comments, especially reading today's papers, with some of the recent debate, not just about the European Union, but I see the same ingredients in the public discourse about the European Court and European Convention of Human Rights as well, and the European Council. And from some members, and I would say to the members of the government benches, and I'd exclude most of the people here today from this, but some of your colleagues are quite specifically trying to undermine, possibly from a position of ignorance, as we've heard, but possibly also quite deliberately, the work of the Council and the work of the Court of Human Rights. Happily.
Would the honourable gentleman agree, in the presence of a PPS from the Home Office and the Minister from the Foreign Office, that a knee-jerk dog whistle reaction to the Rwanda decision and an attempt to attack the European Convention on Human Rights and the European Court of Justice would be a grave mistake.
I genuinely thank the member for the intervention. I couldn't agree more. And it's one of the things that struck me since I got to this House that we're not all goodies and baddies, and there's a number of shades of grey within. I acknowledge the governing party on this issue, but I would very much agree with his point, and happily it's on my next page of notes, which I'll be coming to, so we can all look forward to that. But it's a historic criticism of this framework. As we've heard, the Council of Europe came from a speech from Winston Churchill that he made in Zurich in 1946. It was formed by the London Statute, signed in this city in 1949. I'm a proud SNP member. I have a different worldview to many of the governing benches, many of the members of this House. But I would celebrate the work of the English and the Scottish lawyers in drawing up this international framework of decency. Historically, to withdraw from that would be deeply ahistoric and an act of nihilism and vandalism, which I would regret very, very deeply. The part that the UK has played in the growth and development of the Council of Europe is a global Britain to actually be proud of, because it's affected real change in the real world on our European continent. And to walk away from it would be an act of great, great harm, not to the wider continent only, but also to us at home. So where I pay tribute to that proud history, I have to list a few of the things, as have been mentioned by some of the members, that we see presently. And when we are talking about grievous international acts of criminality in Ukraine or the Donbass or Cyprus or elsewhere, we need to be consistent at home. So loose chatter, in the Queen's speech no less, about a British Bill of Rights as if somehow the ECHR doesn't work for us uniquely, is an absurdity. And I would actually say it's a deeply, deeply regrettable policy trend. Loose talk also of breaking international law, a solemn international commitment only recently signed over the Northern Ireland Protocol, when there's dispute resolution mechanisms within the protocol itself, is setting the worst possible international example to those who would seek to do bad things internationally. How can we possibly look Mr. Putin in the eye with any credibility when we are ourselves talking about breaching international law as if it's a mere bagatelle? The odious reaction that we have seen to the odious policy of offshoring refugees to Rwanda, and quite rightly stopped by the Court of Human Rights, is deeply dangerous. We're also seeing limiting of rights to protest and indeed vote at home as well. And we can look forward to the Court's judgments on that too. And also talk about unelected, from some quarters, not everyone, but some quarters, unelected foreign judges. As if our own judges are elected and as if foreign has anything negative to it. The whole framework of extraterritorial judicial scrutiny is the point. It was designed in this city. It's the point to ensure that enforcement of decency, that enforcement of proper legal standards. The rule of law is an important thing to observe at home as well as abroad. Happily.
Does he share my concern that on the one hand there's those who criticise the credentials of judges in the Court of Human Rights, and yet we here have had Lord Chancellors, like the current Foreign Secretary actually, who haven't really got much legal expertise. And what we really need is a Lord Chancellor here over a sustained period of time to protect the independent judiciary rather than sort of to take pot shots at it.
I'm similarly grateful for the intervention. I'm really concerned about the public discourse in these islands. And if we believe in the rule of law, that means we believe in it when it's difficult or inconvenient to the government of the day as well. And the Scottish Government's been before the Court of Human Rights as well on prisoner slopping out. It's been difficult for us too. But if we sign up to a set of rules and we sign up to an extrajudicial scrutiny, we need to allow it to run its course. And undermining the independence of the judiciary is a really, really, really dangerous place for us to go. So I would urge anyone from all points of the compass to stop it. Happily, I will get to my conclusion shortly,
I don't want to interrupt him for very long, but is he aware that we are arranging a tour around the European Court of Human Rights for members of this delegation, hopefully in the next session, so that they can see for themselves how it works and talk to some of the judges that are there?
That's a very interesting and very helpful point, and I do hope he's inviting the Home Secretary along as well. Which would perhaps we can arrange that. Because my concern is that most ignorance is willful, And we saw an awful lot of willful ignorance over the European Union debate, and we're seeing some of it as well in the Council of Europe debate as well. I believe, with every fibre of my being, that we are an internationalist nation in Scotland, but the UK as well. And signing up to those international structures allows a decency to be promoted on a wider canvas. The European continent, we've heard how wide a range of organisations are covered within the Council of Europe. We can and should be an enthusiastic part of that, not an example of how to undermine it. So it's been a good debate today. I've been glad to take part in it, Dame Maria, but the SNP will always be an internationalist, outward-looking party, and I'd happily work with anybody across this House to those ends. Thank you.
Stephen Doherty.
Thank you, Dame Maria, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship today. And I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Henley for securing this debate at a critical time for democracy and the rule of law across our continent. And I agree with him that it's a shame this wasn't in the main chamber, and I hope that can happen in due course. And it's perhaps arguable that the work of the Council of Europe has never been as critical as it is today, whether that's on human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and of course its crucial role in election monitoring and many of the other activities that it undertakes. And not only do we face the pressing threat of Russia's illegal war against the people of Ukraine, but we also see attempts to sow disharmony, to undermine democracy and to foment tensions elsewhere, whether it's in the Western Balkans, whether it's in Moldova, whether it's in the Caucasus, all of course within the geographic remit of the Council of Europe. And we've had some excellent speeches today. I'd like to echo his thanks to our officials, to the permanent representative, to our judge, and all of those who play a part in delegations, many of whom represented today, including many of my honourable and right honourable colleagues on this side. I want to recognise the comments from my honourable friend from Rothschild, the work he does, and the recognition that he gave to the Council of Europe for that huge historic shift from that time of fascism and communism for many of the member states and where they've come to today. The comments he made about Turkey and others, I will come on to those. And his powerful statement about the importance of the ECHR and its judgments and the role that we played in creating it, and of course recognising the need for reform as well, for example in the length of time of judgments. The right honourable member for North Thanet, I think, made some very, very powerful remarks about the importance of the Council of Europe and its geographic reach. He rightly referenced the expulsion of Russia, something I think we would all agree on. But he also referenced other issues like Cyprus. I had the pleasure of visiting Cyprus recently and agree with many of the comments he made about the need to resolve that conflict and return to that plan for a bi-zonal and bi-communal federation. I'll happily give way.
Thank you, my friend, for giving way. Would he agree that it is also important in this context to have as much contact as possible through the Council of Europe with Russian human rights campaigners and activists, so they do feel there are people actually interested in the difficult situation they find themselves in?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman points out the importance of maintaining contacts with all those who are opposing Putin's regime, and indeed I think Vladimir Kara-Murza was mentioned, a case that we're all deeply concerned about at the moment, and indeed through many bodies, including the Council of Europe, it's important that we maintain contact with those who would stand up for democracy and human rights in Russia and against the actions of the Putin regime. My honourable friend from Swansea West, thank him for the work he does as a rapporteur. Very, very important points. And I referenced what he said about the attacks on judiciary in the UK. I think it's very, very damaging, some of the comments that we've seen. And he, like many others, raised the issue of the ECHR and Rwanda. It's obviously been a crucial point. I would just say this, Dame Maria, and I'd echo the comments of my honourable friend, the Shadow Home Secretary. There's no point in the government blaming anyone else but themselves on this issue. Ministers have been pursuing a policy that they know isn't workable, won't tackle criminal gangs, and despite that, they paid Rwanda 120 million, hired a jet which now hasn't taken off, and all because they wanted somebody else to blame and a confected row, and ignored the warnings about the policy, including the potential treatment of torture victims, which of course is one of the crucial issues of the work of the Council of Europe. So, you know, it's rightly been referenced in this debate, but I think they need to look very, very hard at themselves for why they're in the position they find themselves this morning. I want to reference, Dame Maria, the excellent work that the Council does in so many areas since its foundation. As I mentioned, the Committee for the Prevention of Torture and the work it does in making unannounced visits to places of detention. The Committee on Social Rights, also verifying that rights to housing, health and education, employment are also implemented, as was mentioned by my honourable friend, the work of Greco, its work on anti-corruption, and of course the work of the Council of Europe with other bodies, including the OSCE, the EU, other international bodies, the United Nations, and that using Council of Europe reports in pursuing their own excellent work in these areas. The ECHR itself and I would say this again as a salutary warning to those who make sort of unwarranted attacks on the ECHR, has delivered more than 16,000 judgments. And let's remember the wide range of judgments that it's issued. Those have been on the right to life, the prohibition of torture, the prohibition of slavery and forced labour, the right to liberty and security, the right to a fair trial, the right to respect for private and family life, on freedom of religion, on freedom of expression, on the prohibition of discrimination, and indeed the protection of property. And of course, one of the court's most high-profile cases, of course, ruled that Russia was responsible for the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. So that is the scope of the work of the ECHR, and I think it needs to be more fully understood. And as has been also mentioned, the death penalty abolition role that it has played since 1985, and abolition of capital punishment is now a precondition for accession to the Council of Europe, something I've long campaigned for, and indeed the Council of Europe has played a critical role in that, ensuring we do not have the death penalty in member states. The Istanbul Convention, rightly referenced in this debate. I do have a question for the Minister on that, but acknowledging that violence against women is a human rights violation and a form of discrimination. And of course, the work that the Council of Europe has done on the fight against discrimination for reasons of sexual orientation or indeed gender identity, I think critical issues when we see the backsliding by some members, and I hope that that's a matter of increased attention by the Council over the months and years to come. But, Dame Maria, I want to reiterate Labour's unshakable commitment to maximising opportunities to working alongside allies and partners on issues of human rights and the rule of law and democracy through as many multilateral institutions as we can, and of course critical to those is the Council of Europe. And today's world is too precarious and frankly dangerous to operate unilaterally, as unfortunately we see the government doing on too many occasions recently. And so I hope that the government and the Minister will reiterate our commitments to working through the Council of Europe on these issues, because quite frankly we face some deep, deep threats across our continent and the world, and the Council of Europe will be key to tackling them. I want to come on briefly to a few specific issues. Worth recognising that beyond reiterating its solid, if I just make this point, beyond reiterating its solidarity with Ukraine and expressing an unwavering commitment to its sovereignty, the Council, of course, adopted an action plan for Ukraine, including measures to protect displaced people, support legal professionals, document human rights violations, absolutely critical when we see some of the horrific atrocities that are currently taking place in Ukraine, and also to protect the rights of vulnerable groups, including children and other vulnerable groups, such as the Roma, and the need to, this references the point the Right Honourable Gentleman made, the importance of strengthening links with civil society in Russia and Belarus. And it's that kind of grassroots work that is critical in fighting back against the Putin war machine and the Kremlin's unrelenting disinformation campaign across Europe. I'll happily give way to my honourable friend.
Yeah, would my honourable friend accept that it is very important to accept the credibility and the importance and of the statutory role of the Council of Europe's court? Because if other countries, when they find they have failed to abide by these rules, collectively this can undermine the fundamental values that we're trying to push forward as a human rights, democracy and the rule of law. And the government should think twice before putting stuff in the media about the Council of Europe and the Convention when they're found in need by them.
Well, I'd agree with the principles of what my honourable friend is saying. Indeed, I'd say that applies to judgments of other international courts, including the International Court of Justice, which the government has been taken to task over as well on a number of issues. I mentioned Ukraine, obviously crucial in our focus at the moment, but also the situation in the Western Balkans, very, very serious at the moment. I'm sure the Minister's nodding her head. And the Council of Europe has a critical role and is playing a critical role there in strengthening judicial processes, promoting peace and democracy. And of course, the case of Turkey has been mentioned, and the Committee of Ministers' decision to launch the infringement proceedings against against Ankara over the Osman Kavala case. And I think that demonstrates its commitment to its central values without fear or favour, and was rightly referenced by the member for Henley, wider concerns about Turkey and its infringement of civil and political rights. I will happily give way, yes.
Will he also join with us in supporting the membership of Kosovo to the Council of Europe, which will be coming forward later in the year?
I certainly would, and I plan to visit Kosovo in the very near future, and I'm sure this will be an issue that will come up on the agenda in my visit there and the Western Balkans, so something I'll certainly support. I wanted to end, Dame Maria, by asking the Minister a few questions. Can she give us some reassurances about the government's wider commitment to the Council of Europe and indeed to the ECHR. The Prime Minister has refused to rule out leaving the ECHR. We've obviously seen the many trail proposals about the proposed so-called Bill of Rights, which potentially would diminish the role of the ECHR and undermine its positions. There is a serious risk here of undermining some crucial human rights that we all enjoy. And also, it's worth mentioning the crucial role the ECHR plays in the Good Friday Agreement. And I would like to see the Minister respond and give us some reassurances on that point. Secondly, in relation to the Istanbul Convention, could you just explain what is the reasoning for the government's reservation of Article 59, which protects migrant and refugee women from domestic abuse and violence? And finally, given the point I made about working together with allies, will she assure us that the government will stop taking this unilateral approach that it seems to be drifting towards in recent weeks and months, and instead work together, given the scale of the challenges that we face across Europe and indeed across the world?
Thank you, Dame Maria. It's an absolute pleasure to be serving under your chairmanship this morning. And I would like to start by saying that my right honourable friend, the member for Braintree, would have been delighted to take part in this debate this morning, however, is currently travelling on ministerial duties. Therefore, it's my real pleasure to be responding on behalf of the government. Can I start by kind of saying how grateful I am to my honourable friend, the member for Henley, for securing this debate. And can I also echo many of the comments made by honourable and right honourable members across the chamber in terms of paying tribute to his work on the Council of Europe as the leader of the UK delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly. And, both here, my honourable friend and other members in the UK delegation play a hugely important role in promoting the Council of Europe and its work throughout the UK. And I do note a number of members across the House have mentioned the desire to have been having this debate in the Chamber. I think we can see how important the Council of Europe is and the work done by the Council of Europe and the UK delegation by the sheer number of members in this debate today. And also, just while I'm kind of lavishing praise on my honourable friend, can I also just kind of pick up on the point that my honourable friend, the member from North Norfolk, made in terms of the support he has provided to the newbies in the chamber today. I note a number here and contributing to this debate. And I pick up on maybe he might provide some French lessons as well. But as I say, it's been a really kind of important debate today in terms of protecting, promoting the work of the Council of Europe and, the work that the UK plays in that. And I'm also very grateful to all of the contributions from other honourable and right honourable members during the course of the debate, and hopefully pick up on many of the points that have been raised. Now, as honourable members have mentioned, it was Winston Churchill who first publicly suggested the creation of the Council of Europe nearly 80 years ago. And as honourable members know, the UK played a critical role in founding the Council as Europe dusted itself off after World War II. And we have been an active defender of its values ever since in terms of freedom, liberty and the rule of law in Europe. But Putin has brought war back to our continent on a scale that we have not seen since Churchill's time, with devastating consequences for Ukraine and the wider world. Putin believes he can win through oppression, coercion and invasion. But Europe has been roused, not cowed, by his aggression. And the free world is united behind Ukraine in its fight for freedom and self-determination through sanctions, aid and military support. And the Council of Europe set the tone by suspending Russia within 36 hours of the invasion and subsequently expelling them completely. As my honourable friend mentioned, actually other members have mentioned, naturally the UK delegation was at the forefront of calls for that expulsion, and we commend them for that quick action. This quick, decisive action helped to isolate Putin's regime on the international stage and send a clear signal that his actions are not tolerated by the global community. Now, the Council's also played a role in supporting Ukraine, ensuring the country has the financial and technical support to rebuild in the aftermath of Putin's war, including support from Council of Europe specialists. And also, as my honourable friend mentioned, and others, the Foreign Secretary attended the Council's ministerial meeting in Turin, which underlined the need to consolidate standards on human rights, democracy and the rule of law for our future security. We must learn lessons from Ukraine and do more to protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states from those threatening to undermine it. For example, in the Balkans, in the Eastern Neighbourhood region and in the Caucasus. I wanted to turn to the matter of the budget because I know my honourable friends for Henley, Gainsborough and South West Hertfordshire mentioned this. And the UK is committed to ensuring the Council of Europe has the funding it needs to deliver. Russia's expulsion leaves a €34 million funding shortfall. All member states, including the UK, have committed to cover the funding shortfall for this year. We will work with the Secretary-General to understand the longer-term impacts. But it's important that longer-term financing is considered alongside the Council of Europe's future strategic direction. Honourable members have mentioned the kind of wider work of the Council. Beyond Ukraine, the Council continues to champion equality in other areas, and we agree in raising the profile and the importance of the organisation in this work. We'll aim to increase engagement, ensuring that wherever possible, PACE rapporteurs are able to get the appropriate levels of access. And last month, in this place, we started the process of ratifying its Convention to Prevent Violence Against Women, better known as the Istanbul Convention. And I know how hard my honourable friend has pushed for this ratification, and I want to commend him for his efforts. The UK can also do more with the Council of Europe to reduce violence and discrimination against LGBT people in some member states. And I look forward to, with interest to see what further progress there is on this. And we also remain committed to improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the European Court of Human Rights. We will work with... I will give way briefly.
I'm grateful, Dame Maria. Would the Minister just, before she leaves the Istanbul Convention, can she just respond to my honourable friend's questions about the decision to reserve with respect to migrant women? Because it's an important issue, and we would like some certainty of the direction of travel of the government, which is simply not yet there.
With referring to the Istanbul Convention, I'm happy to kind of follow up with more specifics, but as I say, the Home Secretary made a written ministerial statement in Parliament on the 17th of May, announced the beginning of the process to ratify the Convention on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, more commonly known as the Istanbul Convention, as I say. And we're expecting this process to be completed and for the UK to have ratified this by the 31st of July. In terms of the work, we support members in the Western Balkans and the Eastern Neighbourhood to meet their obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. And a number of colleagues mentioned the case of Turkey and the case specific of Osman Kavala. We're concerned about the judgment against Osman Kavala on the 21st of April and the failure to implement the European Court of Human Rights ruling to release him immediately, resulting in the commencement of infringement proceeding against Turkey. We continue to raise this case with the Turkish government. The promotion of religion or belief is another key area for the UK and for the Council. I'm sorry that the Honourable Member for Strangford is not in his place right now because... he's me. He is in his place. So many face horrific persecution and abuse because of what they believe. And as colleagues will be aware, next month we'll be hosting the International Ministerial Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief, and we welcome the Council of Europe's participation and help draw attention to this pressing issue. And we also recognise the opportunity for the Council to work with other organisations, including the OSCE, and continue close cooperation. In terms, I just wanted to pick up on one of the points which was in terms of the Kosovo application as well. And the UK supports Kosovo's international integration, including its membership in the Council of Europe. Application of the Council of Europe is a signal of its commitment to democracy, the rule of law, and the protection of rights of all its citizens. Briefly, I do want to just touch on the ECHR ruling last night, because a number of members have mentioned it. As the Home Secretary stated, we are disappointed that legal challenge and last-minute claims have meant last night's flight was unable to depart. We will not be deterred from doing the right thing in delivering our plans to control our nation's borders. Our legal team are reviewing every decision made on this flight, and preparation for the next flight begins now. In terms of the future of the Council, Russia's expulsion is the start of a new era for the Council. The UK has been vocal on the Council's future without Russia, asking the organisation to pursue deeper economic, diplomatic, technology and security ties with allies around the globe. As part of this, we've highlighted the need for reform, as honourable members have mentioned, to make sure the Council is effective as possible. We stand ready to assist following the latest eminent persons review. Let me end by reiterating the UK's recognition of the valuable work of the Council of Europe, as we've heard from members across the chamber today. It's an organisation that has stood the test of time and which is now entering a new era where its values face challenge. But together, as a coalition of sovereign nations, we can advance the frontiers of freedom, stand up for open societies, and unleash the power of our collective thirst for peace, just as Churchill imagined so long ago. Thank you, Madam.
John Howell to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It has already been stated that I try to run this group as a cross-party group. But I think it's important to bear in mind that that is also a cross-houses group. There are members of the House of Lords here, and I'm very grateful for Lord Fuchs to have attended most of this session and to sat through it and to take notes of it. Can I thank everyone who has participated? It's been very heartwarming to see such enthusiasm and such agreement on the important things that the Council of Europe does. And I hope that for the future we can look forward to a much longer debate in the main chamber of the House of Commons. I will briefly give way, yes.
Tony Lloyd.
I'd like to associate, obviously, opposition parties in our support for the honourable member in his ambitions. Would he also, though, if I may use this opportunity, the Minister didn't answer my question a few moments ago, nor that of my honourable friend from our front bench. The honourable member is assiduous in looking for ministerial response. Would he join me in asking that we do get responses from ministers?
I will also ask the question on a different occasion and in a different way, but I hope to get a better answer than the one that he got. And on that note, I'm going to sit down and end this debate.
The question is that this House has considered the work of the Council of Europe. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.